Hello, welcome to the Tying Bench. My name is Mark Van Patten. Today we're going to concentrate a little on the old-fashioned and traditional dry flies for trout fishing. And before we get started this morning, I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we're going to be doing. We're going to be pretty well sticking with the original patterns with a couple of slight modifications. Set my coffee out of the way here and let's get on to some materials. Well, first of all, let me show you what hook we're going to use. We're going to be using a Mustad R30, a dry fly hook. Now I'm going to go ahead and tie this in a size 12. 12 is a little larger than generally I'll fish on some of my favorite waters, but on occasion, size 12 Adams is a great searching pattern and will pull a trout, a wily trout, out from under an overhanging bush or an undercut bank when they're just not rising to anything else. So it doesn't hurt to have some size 12s in your box. For our hackles, now when we get ready to hackle this fly, we're actually going to be using two different hackles, a grizzly and a brown. And I'm using a dyed Coachman brown. The traditional pattern just calls for brown, so a natural brown would work just as well. For the wings, I'm having to rely on Little Miss Chicken. This is a hen neck as opposed to a rooster neck that we just looked at, because the feathers on the ends of the hen neck are more rounded, and as opposed to the rooster neck that are more pointed. So these make better wings. For our body fur, this is going to look a little, this is not for all audiences. This is a piece of hide from a muskrat. A rascal was tearing up my dam, so I'm going to make flies out of him. But if you look at the outside of this fur, it's got a lot of guard hairs, it kind of looks brown. If I turn this to where you can see this in the camera, you'll notice it's gray along the edges here. That's the underfur, and that's the part we're going to be using. We're going to, when we snip some off, we'll pull these brown guard hairs out and just use that gray underfur. That is the traditional gray of the Adams dry fly. Now for the tail, I promised you a modification, and here's where it comes in. The original pattern calls for using a mixture of hackles from the grizzly and the brown saddle, and I'm going to be using some peccary, wild boar peccary hair, simply because I like the stiffness of the hair, and it will allow the fly to float and act kind of like an outrigger at the back of the fly, giving a little suspension on the water surface tension. Okay, let's get started with this. We're also going to be using, I might mention, a black thread. In this case, I'm using a 14-aught black thread, but anything 8-aught or finer. With dry flies, you want to go with as fine a thread as you can and still have the strength that you're looking for. And this particular thread is very strong. I'm going to go ahead and start my thread and get it on the hook and cover this entire hook shank with thread so that it's nice and coarse and won't allow the materials to slide up and down on that slick metal. And once we get that in, I'm going to bring my thread right back to about a third of the way back from the hook eye. We're going to do our wings first. And this is something I always have trouble with, remembering to tie the wings first. In fact, I even made myself a note so I wouldn't forget. I always tie the wings on first. I'm going to pick two hackles off of this hen neck. They're about the same size, just to give you an idea in the overhead. Now, I'm not going to try to tie them both on at the same time. I'm actually going to tie them in one at a time. I'm going to start with the one closest to me just because I like to. I'm going to measure the wing tip to be the length of the hook shank. And then I'm just going to tie it in like so. Now when I stand that up, I should be just about the same width or a little more than the hook gap, which is the distance between the point of the hook underneath and the shank of the hook. And then just measure to make sure that you get them the same length. Lay your second feather in and do the same thing. Don't worry too much. Oops, I think I got it a little short. Let's pull that forward just a smidge. Pinch method. A little sloppy there. Let's try that again. There we go. And get it fastened. Don't worry too much about positioning or anything right now, because you're going to have plenty of time to do that later. I'm going to just kind of get them standing up where I can see what I'm doing. Now I'm going to cut off some of this excess at the back and leave a little on there, and actually use that to help build up the taper of the body of this fly. Now, like I said, don't worry about those wings right now. Just leave them where they are. They're fine where they are. Right now we want to get to work on our tail. I'm going to pick just a few short hairs off this peccary hide here. This wild boar. Very stiff hair. Very coarse. And it's going to really give that illusion of those long mayfly tails. Now, I'm not going to stack them. I'm just going to pick out a few hairs, a few longer ones, pull out the short ones. There, that's going to be our mayfly tails. And I might even pull out a couple more of those short ones. There we go. Now, I don't want the tail too much longer than the body, so I'm going to kind of measure it to give myself a marking. And then just pinch method right up on top of the hook shank. You want that tail to be tied right on top. Now take those long pieces and cut them, allowing them to fall just about up to where the butt end of the feather you tied in stopped. So we've kind of built our body, our underbody, you might say, up on this fly. And now I like to take my thread and go under those hairs and pull it straight up under to help keep a lift on that tail, just a little bit of a lift. We don't want a whole lot of hair on there, just a little. Now let's get this muskrat going here. I'm going to just grab a little bunch of this. It doesn't take much. Trim it off right up next to the hide so I get that gray underfur. Pinch it by the underfur like this, and then just start pulling those guard hairs out. Just like that. Pull them out. All you want is that real soft, fuzzy underfur. That's the stuff that allows them to stay dry and warm while they're in the water. So it repels water, which is what we want. We want our fly to float. And so this underfur is ideal for that. Now, see what we have is that gray underfur. Okay, now, take just a small amount. Doesn't take much. And this is a natural fur, so you really don't need any kind of dubbing wax or anything like that on it. Just spin it onto the thread. Always go one way. Just like so. Then, start to wrap your body, working your way forward. And as you go forward, you can build it up just a little more to kind of create a little bit of a taper in the body. Just a little bit at a time. Don't get too much. I always like to wet my fingers just a little bit. If you get too much on there, it won't stick to the thread. And you don't want that. See, now we're getting a nice taper to the body. Right up to the butt of those wings. Oops, let's unwrap. I don't like it. See how it came off of that thread? Okay, that's enough. Now I'm going to trim off this little piece that's sticking out here. It's kind of annoying me. Oops. There we go. That out of the way. Now we want to get our hackles. I've got a little hackle gauge over here. I'm going to put a feather on it and measure it. Make sure I got about a size 12, which is about where we are there. And now I like to prep these feathers by cutting off the trashy end, the webby end right here, and get into the stiffer hackles. Because remember, we want this guy to float, and that webby stuff will soak up water. We don't want that. Then I'm going to create a little comb. So now we're going to take this little comb, we're going to just kind of drop it right down between those two wings and grab the thread with it and pull it back and then fasten it in, just like so. Now we need to do the same thing with our brown hackle. So I'm going to pull one off of here. It's about the right size. Get down here to the right size of the feathers. Here we go. That looks like it ought to be about right. Yeah. And do the same thing with it. Create a little comb by trimming off the trash, stroking it out a little bit, trimming right up beside the quill on either side, Do the same thing. Drop it right down between those two wings. Grab the thread with that comb. Pull it down. Fasten it in. Bring your thread forward. Now, the last feather in is always the first feather wrapped. So first we'll grab our brown hackle. And what I like to do is I like to go down around in front and then come straight up on the first two wraps, straight up behind the wings. Just like so. Right behind those wings. Then I like to bring it in front of the wings. Right at the base of them. Again, don't worry about those wings, because we're going to manipulate those here in just a second. Everybody gets all worried about those wings being perfect. Well, while you're wrapping all this hackle, you're just going to mess with them anyway. So don't. Just don't bother with them. And after you've made a couple of wraps, just kind of throw 2 wraps of thread behind that hackle, 2 in front. Take the serrated edge of your scissor, and then just simply cut it off. Notice I didn't use a scissor like a scissor. I used it more like a slice. That way I didn't cut off any of those nice hackle barbs. Now, again, I'm going to go down in front and come up from behind those wings and throw 2 wraps in the back. Right behind those wings. Then I'm going to bring them up in front, work my way through that brown hackle with a couple of wraps. See, we're getting a nice mixture of grizzly and brown hackle now. And then I'm going to come up and trap it with 2 wraps in back and 2 in front. Just as simple as that. Use my serrated edge scissors, cut it off. Now I like to just kind of pull everybody back out of the way and throw some wraps right up against that hook eye to build up a small little head. This keeps us from trapping too many of those hackle fibers. We get ready to do our whip finish, which we're going to do right now. Throw on a little bit of tying wax. Throw on our whip finish. Get right on that hook eye there. Looks like I'm going to trap some of those hackles anyway, but that's okay. We can just trim them out of the way. Cut our thread, cut those guys out of the way of the hook eye, because we don't want anything in front of that hook eye. We want to be able to get our line through there. Just like that. Now we can mess with those wings. And see, they're already kind of fixed themselves like we want them anyways. Yeah, they're just about perfect. There we go. That's the dry fly. Hey, it's time to take a break and go to Mark's Tippets. We'll be back in just a second or two.